So I have not yet uploaded your new quiz and the new homework. I will be traveling today out of state, and I will try to upload the quiz and the homework either tonight or tomorrow. This time and from onward, I'm trying to set up the system so that after you submit your quiz, you can immediately see the answers that you have given. So that before you take the next attempt, you can get an idea about which questions you got wrong and which questions you got right. If I am successful in setting up the system like that, we will have the same system from here to onward. I think it should be helpful. So today, let's try to finish chapter 7. We should be able to finish chapter 7, and then we are going to start looking at a very interesting chapter of 8, where a lot of issues about information is going to be discussed. So this is where we left last time. The idea was that we were talking about these two ideas. One was that there is an idea called expectation about a future variable x, and optimal forecast of that same variable x, o, f. And rational expectation hypothesis or efficient market hypothesis, they are the same thing, argues that they're the same. Which means that an individual will form their expectation about future based on their optimal forecast about the future, which they form on the basis of all the information they collect. Anytime that information set changes, optimal forecast will change, and if optimal forecast changes, expectation about future will also change. So, if you think about the expected rate of return, an equation that we derived a couple of chapters ago, it's actually summed up as like the growth of the price of the asset that you are collecting, plus some kind of cash payments that you're receiving today. So anytime there is changes in the future price or the current price, the rate of return really changes. Now, we also, in the last class, defined something called expected rate of return, where RE was substituted by, where R was substituted by RE, and PT plus 1, which is a future variable, was substituted by PT plus 1E. So, we are talking about an expected future price that really defines expected rate of return. And we can similarly define and expect, like the optimal forecast, where R is going to be ROF. And PT plus 1 is going to be PT plus 1 OF, which means that you have formed an optimal forecast about future price. So if PT plus 1E and PT plus 1 OF are identical, your RE and ROF are also identical. Which means that if your future expectation about future price and your optimal forecast about future price are identical, your expected rate of return are also identical. Okay, we also added an equation, an equilibrium condition, that in equilibrium, our expected rate of return and our actual rate of return are always going to be the same, which means that R star, which is the actual rate of return in the market, will have to be equal to the expected rate of return of RE. If that is the case, then we can use this equilibrium condition to substitute that, and we can argue that in equilibrium, your equilibrium rate of return is also equal to the optimal forecast of the return. This is actually a powerful idea because it puts a lot of emphasis on the kind of data we have and how we are projecting or forecasting for the future. Okay, so the current prices in a financial market therefore is set so that the optimal forecast of a security's return using all available information equals the security's equilibrium return. So optimal forecast, equilibrium, expectations, they all merge. Okay, so this is a very powerful idea because if this is true, if the optimal forecast about asset prices is equal to the expected value of the asset prices, equal to the equilibrium value of the asset prices, that means the information that are available in the market are efficient. What does it mean? It means that the information that are available in the market are sufficient for an investor to figure out what the market equilibrium price is going to be. Now, whether this is true or not, whether information that is available in the market, information that everyone is using to form their expectation is perfect or not, is obviously a debate. In the next chapter, we are going to talk a little bit about how the available information might be rigged, might not be perfect, might have some hidden information, and most importantly, even if the information set is perfect or efficient, individual to individual really varies in terms of how they process information. Something that is not in your slide, but we talked about in the context of channel. Now, when we talk about efficiency of the information set, we obviously have to talk about something called arbitrage. Arbitrage will be in your exam. Arbitrage is a situation where there are some unexploited profit opportunity. Let's try to understand how in a financial market there can be unexplored or unexploited profit opportunity. So how does a firm usually make profit? They usually buy something at a lower price and sell that as a higher price. So that would be one way to make profit. So when a firm is, when an individual is making a buying an asset today, he or she should have a perfect forecast about how the future price of that asset will play out. That means that the buyer is fully aware of the expected rate of return on the asset, and if that asset earns him some kind of profit, our investor is going to buy that asset. It's a very simple, straightforward process. So whenever our buyer is buying an asset, he already knows what is going to happen in the future. That determines what kind of profit he is going to earn in the future as well. This is not an unexploited profit. Are we all clear on that? Because this is based on all the available information, the projection of the expected rate of return gives our buyer of this asset a projected profit in the future. That's all based on the current market information. But what if some new information comes in? Or what if the market had some hidden information, which is going to be discussed in the next chapter, that nobody were exploiting before, but suddenly those information comes out, and whoever has that information can really play the market in the sense that they might short sell or they might short buy or short sell, right? So imagine that you had a projected interest, expected rate of return of like say 2% in 5 years from now, and suddenly you receive some information that this company is going to merge with a larger company, so the expected future rate of return might actually be higher than what the market information is providing. That's a hidden information, by the way, because nobody else knows about that, only you know about that. So it's not a public information, it's a private information. So what do? You short sell. You buy a lot of stuff on an immediate basis so that you can sell it at a higher price later on. So does it make sense? So this could be a firm who is usually a seller of assets to the buyers, and with this hidden information, somebody inside the seller company might actually start buying more. So that could be a short selling issue. So arbitrage is a very sort of confusing concept. Arbitrage exists in theory, meaning that anytime there is a mismatch of the information set between you and everyone else, anytime you can find some kind of unexploited profit opportunity through various measures, this is called arbitrage. Okay, now you can see clearly that there is a direct relationship between arbitrage and the efficient market hypothesis that we are talking about. The relationship is that as long as market is efficient, as long as the optimal forecast and the expected forecast are identical, as long as the market information is perfect, arbitrage cannot exist. Arbitrage cannot exist in an efficient market situation. Why? Imagine that your optimal forecast is higher than the actual or expected forecast answer. Imagine for some unforeseen event or due to some kind of government policy changes, which is a complete shock to you, your optimal forecast about the future goes up. It goes up higher than what the market equilibrium rate of return is. So if ROF is greater than R star, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do today?
Buy more.
As simple as that, right? So your optimal forecast is going up. It is definitely true that you will try to buy more of that asset. If you buy more of that asset today, the price of that asset is going to go up, and the price of the asset today is negatively related with the rate of return of the asset tomorrow, right? Right? So if you buy this asset more today, PT goes up, RE goes down. RE goes down, R star goes down. If R star goes down, your optimal forecast also goes down. Make sense? So we are now looking at a very stereotypical market adjustment, which you saw in a demand-supply model stuff, where whenever there is some excess supply or an excess demand, there is always upward and downward pressure on price, but we always end up in equilibrium. Do you remember that? It was a very simple, very common mechanism that we talked about here. So you can argue that whenever optimal forecast is higher than R star, this sort of creates this excess demand in the market, which puts upward pressure on the price, but upward pressure on the price really lowers the expected rate of return. And on the other hand, if you have ROF less than R star, and this is kind of important, right? Because if your expected forecast is lower than the market interest or the actual rate of return in the future, what do? You short sell, right? This is where the idea of short selling comes in, if you're a buyer. Right? If you're a buyer, you're going to short sell when your optimal forecast really goes down below R star. And this is kind of interesting, right? Whenever there is a stock market crisis, there are almost always a situation where the market is suddenly flooded with stocks, and that plunges the price of the stock so much that the market crashes. You have seen this, you have heard of this phenomenon, right? If we look at the empirical, set of events that led to some of the recent market crash, how many of you have seen The Big Short? Very, very interesting movie. I'm planning to see the movie. Just looked at the story and it seems like no.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, I mean you have one of the best casts, right? Yeah. And the movie is actually very similar to what we're talking about here. So these people came up with this idea that the stock market is gonna, the housing market is gonna crash. Okay, so if the housing market is gonna crash, so we are talking about the optimal forecast going down below what the people are thinking about, right? The market interest, the rate of return, optimal forecast about the rate of return is going down compared to what the market was planning to give R star, right? So what do? So what did they do? I didn't see the movie.
They bet against the economy.
How do they do that? How do you bet against the economy? Sorry?
It's something called shorting the economy.
That is a short sell. Okay. Exactly what we're doing here. Yes.
You borrow someone's stock and then expectancy of the price drop, and then you sell the stock that you borrow at a high price, buy it back when it falls, and you give it back to the person you borrowed it from.
That actually is the most common form of short selling idea that we see in the stock market. So in stock market, short selling really means that you buy back something at a lower price and sell it at a higher price in the future. These two ideas have to become in the same place, where in the original case, short selling was connected with the maturity of the assets, which means that short selling was not a stock market concept. It was basically a bond market concept, where there is a maturity date associated with the financial instrument. Stocks are perpetual. financial assets, meaning that they never mature, right? So it's not that interesting to talk about short selling in a stock market context, but you're right, that's how people talk about short selling. But imagine that you have a bond, and the bond is supposed to mature in like 10 years. So you initially thought about buying 10 of them, suddenly you buy 20, because the price is low and you expect the price to go up in the future. So when the price comes, you sell those. So that would be an example of what we talk about short selling. Or it could be the other way around as well, right? Doesn't really matter who is doing what. Okay, so that could be an example of a short selling where you sell or sort of liquidate your portfolio. If you do that, you're gonna lower the price of the asset that you are selling. If you do that, your optimal forecast is gonna go up according to the equation. So regardless of what the market is in, if the market is in an excess demand or an excess supply situation, every time price sort of moves in such a way that in equilibrium we always find this to be equal to each other. So that is the only equilibrium situation in the market. Everything else is just disequilibrium. And our efficient market hypothesis argues that unless something dramatic happens, and this is very difficult for me to explain it to you, but allow me to entertain you with in 1 minute. Regardless, unless there are some massive things, some unexpectedly shocking things happen in the economy, this is where the economy will stand. Okay? I want to talk about two things first. Now, first of all, I want to talk about whether this equilibrium is true or not. We really don't know. We really don't know. But let's think about the implication. This equilibrium argues that there is no arbitrage opportunity, meaning that you simply cannot sell from one market and buy from one market and sell it to another market or whatever. There are various ways to think about short selling and arbitrage. A group of my colleagues did a study on financial markets in Asia mainly and in the Middle East. Their data set was very, very extensive, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with the Dubai Stock Exchange, which is one of the largest stock exchanges in the world right now. Then they looked at data from the Malaysian Stock Exchange, which is growing very, very rapidly. So within next 10 to 20 years, New York Stock Exchange, these are going to become underdogs. This is how people are looking at it. So what they find is that in their extremely large data set with a lot of empirical observations, there were hardly no arbitrage opportunity. And that was fascinating because they are not the only people who are finding that result. There has been tons of papers trying to figure out whether it is possible for you to buy Apple stock at a lower price in London Stock Exchange and sell that after 2 hours in New York Stock Exchange. The answer is it's almost never a possibility. Make sense? Okay, now I want to talk about this idea of what does it mean for a shocking, big event happening to the economy. So there are various ways to understand about, think about that, right? First, let's try to understand about what do you mean by unanticipated events, something that you don't expect. So what kind of example can you give about an unexpected event? Anyone?
Conflict kind of out of nowhere.
Very good. Very good. September 9/11, right? Or some kind of war. Could an announcement of the Fed to change interest rate be considered as an unexpected event?
Well, you've had observations in the past of them doing that.
Okay.
So the historical precedence is there, right?
You have to be more specific.
Well, it's like for 9/11, nothing like that had ever happened
Yeah,
before.
but we're talking about the Fed now, right?
But we've seen them change an interest rate.
In certain times, you mean? Example?
Recessions.
Okay, so what do you expect Fed to do during recessions?
Make money more available.
increase money supply, reduce interest rate, stimulate the economy. Does the Fed always do that? The answer is no. There is a visitor today who is going to speak about slightly different ideas, but he's going to bring back some of these ideas that we're talking about here. He's presenting today, and Fed does not do that. And people who criticize Fed's role during the Great Depression, during 1982 recession, argue exactly the same thing. That they argue that Fed never does what is required, what people expect the Fed to do. The only exception, and this might surprise you, is the 2007-2009 recession. That is probably one of the most significant time when people expected Fed to do certain things, and the Fed actually did that, like cutting interest rate, like even buying back some of the toxic assets, which we are going to come back and talk. So it is very difficult to define what an unexpected event is. The only examples of unexpected events that we think about are things that are completely shocking, like a war, like an attack in a given day. And if those happens, the next question that researchers mainly ask is that, what kind of shock is this? Is this a shock that is going to happen just once and everything comes back to normal again? Are we all clear on what I'm talking about? Or is it going to be a shock that is going to permanently change the landscape? Any example of a shock that could be permanent? What about internet? Is that a shock? Is that a permanent shock? Think about before internet, think about after internet. Everything before internet was done in a fundamentally different way than everything is done after the invention of internet. Think about it. Internet is called a technological change. And technological change, if they actually happen, are probably the best example of shocks that are permanent to an economy. And if that happens, and we're going to see that, it could fundamentally change your information set, right? And part of the reason why we no longer have arbitrage is because when you are buying a stock from the London stock market at a lower price, there is somebody already waking up in New York trading the same thing in that market. So there is virtually no difference between the rate of return or the prices in any market anymore. That's the physical reality. Okay. So with that, let me move on. The next concept that we want to spend a little bit time is to understand what do we mean by the information set. We have been talking about the information set many, many times because information set is the basis of the decision-making process of the buyer and the seller in the market. So when we talk about information set, are we talking about information that is available outside, like the newspaper, like everything? The answer is no. Please, and please hear me on this. Information is a lot of things, right? Some information are published in public domain where everyone can utilize those information. And when you have information that everyone knows, it means that this information set is available to everyone. So everyone has already been using that information to form their forecast, to form their expectation. So the equilibrium interest rate that you see in the market already contains all information that are available publicly. And that raises a very interesting question. Is that the only way you can get some kind of information that really changes your behavior are private information. Information which are either illegal or which is something that you have acquired by yourself through legal means. You can do that. You can conduct a survey and get an information from the population. When you do that, when you have an exclusive set of information that not everyone else has in the economy, you could essentially be engaged into an arbitrage opportunity. You can really play the market. Right? Other than that, if you don't have any information, exclusive information, empirical evidence suggests that most part that recommendations from investment advisors cannot really help outperform the general market, which means that if you actually hire all these consultants who are also relying on the same information that you and I are looking at, their information and advices are basically meaningless. If you can educate yourself, you could do the same, you could gain the same kind of return from the market as an expert would, because the expert really does not have any extra information that you don't have. The problem between you and the expert is that the expert can process that information, you cannot. Do you all understand that? So the difference between you and the expert is not that he has a better data set, he simply is able to process the information better than you do. Now this is an undergraduate level course, so we really cannot explain what this information processing idea is. It's a very powerful idea. As you grow older, as you participate more in the marketplace, you will realize that at the end of the day, the difference between a successful person and a failure is just how you process information. Please remember that. Okay, so the only thing, and I talked about that, is a hot tip that could be insider information that could really change. So stock prices can only change whenever information is new and unexpected. Otherwise, stock market is going to always follow sort of a stable pattern. So that really concludes our discussion about how important the information set is. And we are going to now make conclusions in this chapter by looking at the last concept. And this is again a problem that has plagued us for a long time, which is to know how to interpret this efficient market hypothesis. So far we have covered an idea called efficient market hypothesis, where we are saying that if everyone utilizes their full information, they can find, project or forecast or expect an interest rate or return that is identical to the market rate. Does that mean that the market is efficient? Does efficient market hypothesis mean that the market is efficient? So the question that I want to start first is, what do you mean by an efficient market? What do you mean by an efficient market? How do you look at, what do you think about what an efficient market is? I want some feedback on this.
I guess efficient would be like lack of arbitrage opportunities.
True. That is one way to think about arbitrage, efficient market. Anything else? This is an economics course, and I want to make absolutely certain that when we think about an efficient market, we are thinking in terms of the opportunity cost. We could argue that an efficient market is a market where prices reflect the true opportunity cost, meaning that prices are not too high, not too low compared to the actual price of the good, what it should be. So what it should be and what it is really determines whether a market is efficient or not. It has got nothing to do with what you expect and what it should be. You understand? Are we clear on this? There's a basic difference between efficient market hypothesis and an actual efficient market. An actual efficient market has got nothing to do with what you think about the market price should be. An efficient market is a market where prices are what they should be. And in most of the markets, they are not. In most of the markets, prices are not what they should be, right? The CEO of Tesla once famously said that the price of his company's stocks are overpriced. And that really shocked everyone who was buying Tesla stocks. I'm sure you guys are aware that Tesla stocks were really hot even a couple of months ago. Why? Because in asset market there are always this idea where some stock prices are overvalued or overpriced, and some stock values are undervalued, underpriced. Because some of the stock market price movements are motivated by bandwagon effect, meaning that everyone is buying something, so I also buy that without really looking at the fundamentals. Everybody is selling something, and I sell that without looking at the fundamentals. So there are always these so-called asset bubbles in the market. Asset bubbles are or ideas where the price of the asset really does not reflect the true value of the asset, and it is very common. Asset bubbles are probably more common than actual markets having actual prices. So if market prices are not the real price that it should be, we should understand that markets can be following efficient market hypothesis, meaning that there could not be any arbitrage, but at the same time market themselves would not be efficient. Okay? Now this imposes a very strong dilemma in terms of how our founding economists or founding academicians used to look at efficient market hypothesis. So the two names that I mentioned before, Shannon and just forgot his name. I'm getting old. Okay. So the guy who came up with the rational expectation model. So that's the 1961 paper. I could give reference to that later. They used to think that efficient market hypothesis and market efficiency are the same thing. They argued, and there are papers for that if a market has no arbitrage opportunity, that market is automatically efficient. Meaning that if in a market people can perfectly predict what the future price is going to be, in that market prices are always going to be what they should be. Are we all clear on that? It is called a stronger definition of efficiency, market hypothesis, and it's wrong. I have written a paper on that. And we find that this statement that efficient market hypothesis and efficient market are not the same thing. And it is actually not true even if you think about it from an empirical perspective. So most of the financial markets are not efficient, although they follow efficient market hypothesis, meaning that they eliminate any kind of arbitrage opportunity. Okay, so we are going to conclude this chapter by pointing out that beyond this very restrictive theory of efficient market hypothesis, there are other areas of finance that probably has been more successful in explaining stock market behavior, behavior of the buyer, behavior of the seller, and behavior of the stock prices. They are in general called behavioral finance, where they undertake approaches similar to economists and try to figure out the behavior that is driving the asset prices in the market. So they talk about things like loss aversion, where people are too risky to invest. They talk about overconfidence, where you buy just blindly because you are overconfident about the market. They talk about social contagion, which is actually a fancy word for bandwagon effect. Is anyone familiar with what bandwagon effect is? Bandwagon effect is a behavior where you follow what everyone else is doing. That's the irrational behavior. Because our rational expectation hypothesis says that you make decision based on the available information that you have. In bandwagon, you don't look at information, you follow the person in front of you. Okay? So these are very productive, very useful explanations of how the stock market really works out. We are not going to talk about them because this is an undergraduate level course. Let's spend 10 minutes looking at some of the questions from this chapter. Let's start with question number 5. You can see what the correct answer is. That's not the problem. Let's try to understand why B is the correct answer and not anyone else. So question number 4 says information plays an important role in asset prices because it allows the buyers to more accurately judge A, the liquidity of the assets, B, risk of the asset, C, capital of the asset, policy of the asset. C and D really doesn't make any sense, but A and B kind of makes sense, and I want to talk about why B is the correct answer and not A. Can anyone give me an idea about why B is the correct answer and not A? Information can help you to get a good judgment about risk, right? It can also give you a very good idea about the liquidity, right? If you have enough information, you know how large the market is, how many buyers are there, how many sellers are there. These are all information that is required to understand whether your market is liquid or not. So why is the B correct answer? Anyone?
Does risk plays a higher role in that with the prices of the asset?
No, because risk is a more complete information, complete answer. So A and B are both potentially correct answer, and B is the best answer. And I have said it over and over again, and I am always criticized by my students that I have questions in the exam which has multiple correct answers. I will not be able to avoid that. Why? Because this is a fairly complicated, challenging course. In the previous exams, I have been able to avoid having major questions with answers which look identical, but this is a question which is very much likely to be in your exam. When you have questions like this, you should understand that risk, when you analyze risk also analyzes liquidity, right? Because liquidity is a part of the riskiness of an asset. If an asset is less risky, the asset is more, if the asset is less liquid, the asset is more risky, right? Are we all clear on that? We talked about various aspects of the riskiness. So B is a more complete answer, B is a better answer, so B is the correct answer. So that's for question number 4. Question number 5 is a straightforward one. I want to focus on question number 6. I think I made a mistake, right? We wanted to talk about 5, but I ended up talking about 4. I apologize. 5 is a straightforward question. You can take a look at it on your own. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about 6. What do you think? It's a definitional question. So you need to, you need to know what the definition of adaptive expectations are. So if expectations are formed adaptively, A, people use more information than just pass data on a single variable to form their expectation of the variable. Is that true? Is that true? That's not true. According to adaptive expectation or any kind of expectation that you have learned so far, people always use only past information to form their expectation. A is not true. What about B? Often change their expectation quickly when faced with new information. Is that true? Is B true? Yeah, B is true. B is true because the only time the buyers and the sellers are going to change their expectation is when they find new information. What about C? Use only the information from past data on a single variable to form their expectations of that variable. Which part of this statement makes sense and which part of the statement doesn't make sense? Let's please spend some time on this. Before that, I want to cheat and look at what's the correct answer. Okay. So before looking at C, let's convince ourselves that D doesn't make any sense. Never change their expectations once they have made is not true. They will change their expectation if there are some changes. The problem is with between B and C. So let's go back to C. Use only the information from past data on a single variable to form expectations of that variable, which means that when they want to look at the price of bonds, they look at the past price of the bonds, right? That makes perfect sense that this is true, right? Why is not B correct answer? B also makes sense. That they change their expectations when faced with new information. Yes?
It's not always quickly.
Or it is not often. It is not quickly or it is not often. We really didn't talk about the quickness of the adjustment process. Hopefully we will have some time to talk about the speed at which people change their expectations. But in this chapter it should be clear that if according to efficient market hypothesis these events are rare, that you find new information. That information is so dramatic, so fundamental that you change your behavior in the stock market or in the financial market. So B is correct in that sense. Okay. Do I want to cover? Yeah, okay. I'm running out of time. Please take a look at these questions. I will upload them in Blackboard. I want to start talking about chapter 8 because we are sort of running behind. Chapter 8 is much more fascinating and interesting than any other chapter that we have covered so far, because in chapter 8 we will look at the financial market but from a information perspective, and this is fascinating. Okay, we will talk a lot about economic efficiency. What do we mean by an efficient market? Most of the times efficient market will require that the information is efficient, meaning that everyone is using the same information. The discussion will be motivated by the fact that in reality, quite more often we find information not shared equally between the two sides of the market. Meaning that buyers have some information which sellers don't, and sellers have some information which buyer does not. Okay? The motivation behind the discussion of this information issue comes from a slightly strange source. I want you guys to take a look at this table. I teach an upper level course called Emerging Economics, where we talk about how financial market development has created pathway for developing a lot of countries in the world. And in that context, we talk about the nature of financial market in different countries, and they are fundamentally different. This graph is talking about sources of external funds for non-financial businesses. So this is like if you want to set up a Pizza Hut, right? Or you want to start your own business of some kind of production, a comparison of the United States, Germany, Japan, and Canada. So we want to look at where does most of these firms in the economy get their funding from, right? Are we all clear on the question? There are some shocking results here. First of all, notice bank loans appear to be a major source of external funding for Germany and Japan, but not a major source for USA. Non-bank loans, these are loans from the central bank. These are loans from another company, like Apple giving some kind of loan to a startup company. Appears to be the largest source of funding by firms, non-financial firms in USA. Their role in other countries are very, very small. And finally, bonds appear to be the second largest source of external funding in USA compared to the rest of the world. And stocks, shockingly, are the least most important source of funding for any of these non-financial organizations. Which means that Apple or Microsoft or all these large companies, they get most of their external funding not from the stock market, regardless of how overpriced the stock prices are. This is fascinating, right? So the question is why? We're gonna look at this question, not only in this chapter, but for a couple of chapters in the future as well. Based on this table and tables like that, we talk about 8 basic facts about the financial markets around the world and not only USA. Number 1 is that stocks are not the most important sources of external funding for business. Do you all see that? Do we all see that? This is stocks, right? For every country, across the board, stock market is the least important source of funding. So that's observation number 1. Observation number 2, issuing marketable debt and equity securities is not the primary way in which businesses finance their operations. Look at the bond market. Other than USA, the bond market is not that important for firms, right? For USA, this is kind of big deal, but for other countries like Germany, Japan, Canada, we are talking about developed countries. They are not a big deal. C3, indirect finance is many times more important than direct finance. So what is indirect finance? Can anyone remind me?
Involves an intermediary.
Involves an intermediary. That could be a mutual fund, that could be a bank, right? So if you go back, is that true? Bank loans appear to be like the major driving force in getting external funding to these organizations, right? So 4, financial intermediaries. I apologize. 4, financial intermediaries, particularly banks, are the most important source of external funds used to finance business. So 3 and 4 are basically the same. 5, the financial system is among the most heavily regulated sectors of the economy. That's an empirical fact. If you compare a stock market with a cattle market, you know that stock market is subject to more rules and regulations than a cattle market. We all know that. So the question is why? That's a very, very important question. Number 6, only large, well-established corporations have easy access to securities market to finance their activities. Meaning that only large companies, large well-known companies can really use the securities market to obtain financing. If you are a startup company, nobody's going to buy your stock, right? It's an empirical fact. Are we all clear on that? 7 is very important. Please look at 7. 7 says that collateral is a prevalent feature of debt contracts for both household and businesses. What is a debt contract? A debt contract is actually a stock or a bond. Isn't that true? It's a piece of paper that says that I am taking some money from you and I am going to return that money at some time in the future. It might surprise you to know that most of the debt contract is subject to some kind of collateral requirement. Although we see it or not doesn't really matter. Sometimes collateral could be the goodwill of the company. So when you buy stock of Apple, you really think that the profit that Apple is making is the collateral for the stock that you are buying. Isn't that right? You all see that? Are we all clear on what collateral is? Collateral is something that backs up the return of the assets. So if I buy an asset, let's say I take a loan from the bank and the bank takes my house as collateral, which means that if I somehow fail to pay the loan, bank is going to take away my house. Right? When companies borrow from banks, they also provide they also provide this kind of collateral. Collateral can be two kinds. Sorry, debt can be two kinds. Debt can be uncollateralized and collateralized. So a house is a collateralized debt. You take that debt from the government and you pay. You have some kind of collateral for the house. Your credit card debt is a non-collateralized debt, meaning that there is nothing to back it up, right? You simply can use your credit card and not pay. Number 8. Debt contracts are extremely complicated legal documents that place substantial restrictive covenants on borrowers. What does it mean? It means that when you look at debt contracts, the borrowers are subject to heavy rules and regulations than the lenders. Why? Why should the borrowers bear the burden of the legal restriction and not the lender? 8 very critical observations of the financial market. We will look at them on Monday. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend.